So we'll begin. Okay. We'd like to tell you about something very important about the Soteria project and how it's developing, and how I think we can learn a lot about it. That's what you'll be hearing about for the next hour and a half. My name is Lichtenberg. I'm a psychiatrist.
I'm Sinai. I'm a social worker and the director of the Women's House in Jerusalem.
My name is סיוון, and I wrote my thesis. I did a research about the Soteria house. This was a qualitative research, and it was about the experiences and the opinions and perceptions of the staff working at the house.
Now, for 30 years I worked in a closed psychiatric inpatient ward. For 25 years I was in charge of the department and, until I was fired. And I'd like to tell you about why I was fired. And the thing is that, you know, when something doesn't work, so the human tendency is either to do more of it, more of the same thing, or to do less of the same thing, but too rarely do we try to do something different. And one of the reasons for that is because when you do something different, you sometimes have to pay a price. And I had a sense that psychiatry, I think a lot of people here have a sense that psychiatry can do better, or should do better than it does. I mean, I remember when I started working in the field, and those were heady days, optimistic days, when we knew that the brain sciences would advance and genetics would solve the human genome, and then no doubt we would solve this riddle of mental illness. And it hasn't panned out. It just hasn't happened that way. And when I think about it, where has psychiatry gone off track? So I think there are three main issues. I forgot to even ask about this. Do people here, I'm very happy people came and they left lunch, and the time was sometimes hard to be awake. People here know how many people here have heard about Soteria? How many people work in Soteria? No, you start on Sunday. How many people work in a crisis center? Oh, all these people work in Soteria? That you raise your hands actually? That's wonderful. Where?
In the Netherlands.
Oh, good.
We're giving a workshop after the coffee break.
And we'll be there, right? A mutual visit. Has anyone never heard of Soteria? Why would you come around this way? Anyone who never raises their hand under any situation? Anyone who would like to set up their own Soteria where they live? Good. Where do you live?
Near Rotterdam.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's sufficient.
So listen carefully, and you'll understand exactly how to do it. Okay. So the problems with psychiatry, as I see it, first of all, is the loss of subjectivity, sometimes called psychiatry used to be studying the mind without the brain, but for the last decade it's become the brain without the mind. The psychiatry developed in the 19th century, late 19th century, when there was a sense as a medical science, it has to work like a science, where we have a petri dish in the laboratory, where we're very objectively observing what happens. Think of Kreplin over here, who is cataloging mental symptoms and trying to develop diagnoses and looking for the neuroanatomical aberrations. And there was a sense that we can do this objectively, which what it leads to is that you can have an objective place to observe somebody on a sterile, artificial psychiatric ward, but you're not really capturing the person. And if you lose the subjectivity, you don't understand what you're missing over here, because ultimately brains don't hallucinate, people hallucinate. So when the psychiatrist loses his subjectivity, then he thinks that observing the sterile environment he can get answers when he's really missing the person. And when we lose the sight of the person's subjectivity, we misplace the sight of the person's suffering, which is again not the brain, it's the person. Incidentally, at Soteria, one of the things that we do, and we'll tell a lot more about it, is when someone finishes their stay with us, in addition to the natural discharge summary which we are supposed to prepare, we always ask the person, the resident who finished his time with us, to write his own summary of how he experienced his stay, and that becomes part of the official record so that we can have the person's unique, subjective, first-person view of things. So psychiatry, first of all, has lost sight of subjectivity, which is connected to the next problem that people pay lip service to biopsychosocial model, but psychiatry has become much too bio, and the bio trumps the psychosocial, pardon the expression, and people don't pay attention enough to the psychosocial. There's a sense that the brain is this tissue encased in our skull, and if we can figure it out, that's all that we have to do, and we'll know everything. But of course, it's not really true, because the brain is not just here. The brain is everything impinging upon it in the past, around me. All of you are in my brain. Those who haven't fallen asleep after lunch, I'm in your brain. And as you listen to me, I'm actually causing neurochemical changes in your brains. Don't get upset, it will pass in a few days. And psychiatry, but looks too much at the bio. When actually a person's trauma, a relationship is as embedded in the brain as a dopamine receptor. And finally, if we lose sight of the subject and we lose sight of the psychosocial, so we sometimes can forget to pay the necessary respect to a person's inalienable sacrosanct rights. And that also can be a reason where a place where psychiatry has sometimes gone wrong. And Soteria is an attempt to see to it that things are done, that we simply reverse these three problems. First of all, the subjective is very much there, very much pay attention to the person and see him as a person. In fact, the most basic insight of Soteria is that even the most extreme mental states, the psychosis or suicidal depressions, manic states, they are still part of the human experience, and they require a humane response first and foremost. If we use medication or all that, that is possible, but always secondary to just the humane response. So that we then are able to give a full biopsychosocial treatment where we pay attention, where we try to treat on all the levels the full richness of the person. And of course, we have very much respect for human rights, in that we don't do anything with coercion. We don't even try to convince people to come to Soteria. We tell them when we have an initial interview, we get to know them, they get to know us, and then we say, we think we can help you and make a decision. Sometimes we're disappointed that we don't pressure them because they're used to these conflicts, but the person has to take responsibility that they want to be helped. Now, working in the department, I wasn't satisfied with the way things were going. I felt that though it was basically a good department and we're giving more or less state-of-the-art care, that we were missing some important things. People would come with these amazingly rich stories and tales and sometimes psychotic contents, and then in the staff discussion would be, should we add 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams? And it always felt an impoverished response to a very rich human dilemma. And I read R.D. Lang, which I made required reading as a first reading for the residents I've taught. R.D. Lang, I think a familiar name over here, but he was a person who, in the 60s, 70s, when he was most active, had this wonderful intuition where ability to understand people who were psychotic, to make sense of their extreme existential crises, as he explains very well in this book. And I continued working all those years. Now, just to give you some sense, this is a Google map of where I worked. So first of all, you see, this is a municipal cemetery. Here's the municipal garbage dump, talking about the kind of geographic messages which society gives to mental patients who are pushed to the edge. And down here is a shooting range. So during the day, you can actually hear shots being fired. And sometimes people with paranoid tendencies would ask me with deep concern, who are they aiming at? not a great place to put anyone, but the psychiatric patients, who cares, right? So I wasn't happy there at all. This is where I worked. See, that was, my office was located on the bottom, obviously the bottom floor. What else? Then, inspired by R.D. Lang, Lauren Mosher set up the first Soteria home. This was the 1970s. I don't have to dwell on it if I'm talking to a Soteria crowd. And that's Lauren Mosher. And they did some research, which very basically, that and subsequent research in a few other Soteria houses have shown that it's as efficient as hospitals in reducing symptoms. Obviously, the experience is much more positive for the person there as compared to one who spends time in the hospital. It's not even necessary to research that, but they have much less self-stigma, the internalized stigma, which a person becomes and is socialized into the role of a mental patient from the first time he's in the hospital. Less medication, obviously, we use in the hospital. I even knew before Soteria, I would always say that the medication which you give in the hospital, half the dosage is to calm the patient, half is to calm the staff. After Soteria, I think I would say 2/3 is for the staff. We have different ways of calming staff. We have abundant supervision. We have a lot of discussions and much better methods. Better psychosocial adjustment. If you look 2 years later, people have done a better job of returning to their life trajectory after a time at Soteria as opposed to time in the hospital. Now, for many years, like in 2004, I started working in my partner, Remy there, to set up this alternative. And it took so many years because I was and am determined that this be part of the public mental health system, that nobody should have to pay for this. Something which has so far not been completely realized, but it will be. I'll get to that towards the end. And every place I would turn to in the Ministry of Health and the medical insurance people, they would always say, wonderful idea, this is a future, you don't have any money, good luck. Until finally in 2016, we decided that that's it. 2004, 2016, that's a long time to be pursuing a dream without it being realized. We decided we're just going to start with the help of Caliber Foundation, a philanthropic foundation in mental health care in Jerusalem. We set to work. At the time, in 2016, we had no approval, no license. A lawyer who made a very successful living from suing physicians was kind enough to give me a pro bono opinion that the moment the inevitable catastrophe happens, my staff and I will pay with our license, with our property, and with our liberty. So we were taking certain risks when we did this. I still don't know how the insurance company agreed to cover this. We set to work. Remy is a story in itself because I know him because he was hospitalized with me in a catatonic state in 2004. And I managed to get him out of that through a religious ritual without any medication. That's a story for another lecture. Anyway, so we decided to set up shop in a center of town, not next to the cemetery, but in the center of Jerusalem, right near downtown, near cafes and festivals and all sorts of things, where you can hear the muezzin emanating from the nearby old city, and you can hear the bells of the Ethiopian Abyssinian church, and you can hear this from the study halls, sounds emanating of children. It's as central as you can get, which in itself is a very important message which you wanted to convey. Maybe we should choose next time a more rural place with spaces, but again, that's another issue. This looks different than my psychiatric department did. This is the entrance, it's the living room. This is the very impressive 4-meter ceiling living room. People would come and visit, and colleagues, especially in the first months, they began to hear these strange rumors about something different happening, and almost inevitably they would all say, but I want to live here. And that's the point. That's exactly the point. So why shouldn't they? and it's a home. I mean, as you can see, and if you'll be there, it feels like a home. Maybe with a rather large underwood family, but it's a home. And the only slight hint that it's not only a home is, I don't know if you can see it in the kitchen over here, there are two locks. One contains the drawers with the sharp knives. Don't forget to lock the drawer every time. And the other contains the medication. And we set to work. And a year later, we set up a women's home also in a lovely residential area in Jerusalem. Nice. It's as nice as it's even nicer than it appears in the photographs. This is a living room with an outdoor with a large courtyard, and these are really lovely photos of a wonderful place that we have. Now, what happens in the home? Well, first of all, and we'll hear a lot more about that from my colleagues, the backbone of the staff are not professionals. The backbone, what makes Soteria happen are the companions. These are people who do not generally have any kind of official academic degree. Some of them are students. Many of them have lived experience. It's always interesting, wonderful, and the others, some might answer, "Well, of course not." I say, "Well, we'll see if you're good for the job anyway." And so it's kind of averting the way things often happen, and it's the companions who are chosen because of their ability to contain intense emotions. Soteria, as Lauren Moshe writes in his amazing book Soteria, which I hope people have read, people work with Soteria. Soteria is not for the faint-hearted. To work in Soteria is much harder than in the hospital. When I began working in the hospital, when I began in Soteria, I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit that I suddenly became nostalgic for the isolation room which you have in the hospital. The ability to be able to call, the burly attendant and say, "Hey, he's causing trouble, take care of him." And everything was solved, and suddenly we couldn't do that. You have to meet the person, have to establish contact with the person, and find a way in which we can actually help him feel better. The food is wonderful there. No meat, incidentally, but that's a whole other issue. And you don't know, not from the photos, not from anywhere, not from if you come there, really who's come to get help, who's coming to give help. Because those who are getting help used to get help. Occasionally, those who give help will again be getting help, and the boundaries are very fluid. So we've already set up 2 homes, and the future is very bright. I really think that, as opposed to what's happened so often, where they have a single Soteria and sort of stayed there, we have 2. Another 4 homes have been set up along the lines which the Ministry of Health determined based on our model. We're moving forward. In fact, in 2 weeks we're having our 3rd home, which Yair will be in charge of. Raise your hand. And which Oren is going to be a psychiatrist there. And that's going to be 3 homes with a total of 30 beds between the 3 of them, 10 in each. That, I think, sort of doubles the Soteria beds in the world. And we are, I'll talk more about the vision, but we really think that we're onto something over here, and we're happy to tell you about it. Now to a little bit more about the homes themselves.
So I'll tell you a little bit from inside, what it's like to be inside the house. Since I work in the women's house, I'll probably naturally talking female some of the time, but most of the things are relevant to both roles. So we have 3 principles. We're talking about reducing hierarchy, which is one of the, obviously, main things that we try to accomplish. I'll start by telling you a story about something that happened a couple months back. During a conversation between a psychiatrist and a resident, the resident felt offended by something that the psychiatrist said, something that can happen. And she came out of that conversation, and she talked to the companions, she talked to the other residents, and it was an issue. She felt really bad about it. The house started to be rattled about it, and we thought, how do we deal with this in the Soteria way? So we had a house meeting. Everyone who wanted to join could join, of course, staff, residents, and open. How do we feel? What's going on? Does someone want to say something? Someone want to share their feelings, suggest something? And it actually started by one of the residents. She's 20 years old. She said, well, maybe sometimes there's misunderstandings. And she told the psychiatrist, you know, my grandfather, he's a doctor, and he uses a hearing aid. Maybe a solution like this could be something that could be useful in this situation. That kind of helped the tension in the room a little bit. And then people started sharing. First, the residents talked about what it's like to be in a therapeutic situation when there's someone that's the therapist that's coming to help you. What's it like to be, what do you need from a therapist? What do you expect them to do? What are you scared of? Really deep things that they were carrying with them for a while. They started talking in general about hierarchy and therapeutic situations, the power relationship of being in therapy. And through that, we got to power relations in general between men and women in society. It was a really, really good conversation, and I felt that we got to the source of things. People talked about really the deep and most important things about the situation. I was really excited. I was proud that this is actually what's happening. So it's like a taste of something that happens in different levels in Soteria. I can say that, like, Tessa talked about human rights and respect. That's the basis of what we do. We don't even talk about it. It's not something it's obvious. Everyone knows this. We come from this perspective. And no one feels superior to anyone else. I think the staff feel that the problems that the residents are dealing with are something that it's kind of a continuum, that we're at some point and they're at some point, and maybe in a different time in life things will be reversed. Maybe they had less support than we did to deal with situations. Maybe things are at a higher intensity, but no one feels better than someone else, which is really felt throughout the house. There's no coercion at all. We don't force anything to do anything. And coming into the house, anything that happens to do in the house, we just don't use force. You're welcome to leave if you want, whenever. If you feel that you're not in a situation that you can leave on your own, you would ask to have a family member pick you up, but everything is consensual. Boundaries. We have a few rigid boundaries, a few things that we have to keep just in order to keep everyone safe and protected in the house. But mostly we make decisions on every situation by itself. We have some guidelines on what to notice, what to make sure that we don't cross some lines. But every situation gets its point to look, what about this person, what about the community, what can we do that would be the best for this situation? And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty, powerlessness, anxiety, feelings that arouse in the residents and the staff all the time. We train our staff to accept these feelings, to understand they're part of what's happening, and come from a perspective that it's okay. It's okay to feel like this. The companions have to make a lot of decisions, like when they're in the house, because they know better. It doesn't matter if the psychiatrist is not there at the moment. He might know whatever he needs, but they're right now. They saw what happened. They saw what happened in the morning, how the house is dealing with it. So they make a lot of decisions, and they have to hold a lot of what's going on in the house. Of course, there's always someone to consult. No one is alone in this. We're a community, and there's always someone to be there with you. And of course, like I said in the beginning, there's an existing hierarchy that it's there. In order to have this community and to help people, there has to be some hierarchy. People have different roles, different authorities, different responsibilities. It's not like we're all just the same. There's different roles, but we're all equal. So we do talk about these things, about the hierarchy that does exist, how we feel about it, what we want to do, how we want it to be here. And the case manager, the person that's like in charge of each resident to know the whole process, their past, what's going on in the house, what's going on with other residents, what's the plan for the future, all these things, is never a psychiatrist. It's either a social worker, a psychologist, a psychodramatist, could be any of them. The psychiatrist is just an advisor. He's the psychiatrist. Of course, this all sounds great. I can just be more flexible with everything, but there's complexities, as you probably think. First of all, crisis situations, which happen a lot. Like as I said, we don't have someone that would just come and take the situation away, and not using force is hard. It makes us have to deal very flexibly, very creatively. We find ourselves like running outside after someone in socks in the middle of the night. All kinds of things that they work, sitting on the rooftop with someone, different things that help in certain situations.
Without our clothes on.
Yeah, the resident, without clothes.
Yeah.
And more than you could even imagine. It's fun. It's actually fun. You have to really be creative and think like what would you do in this situation if it happened to you, if it happened to your friend?
Really fun? Fun is the word?
What?
Fun is the right word for it?
It's an acquired taste.
Okay.
There is fun. There's other things as well, but it's fun. I can say it's fun. And also, when the boundaries are not so rigid, it's hard to feel safe and protected because we're used to having things very clear and very, you know where the edge is. In Soteria, you don't always know when things can change, and it's hard, especially in the women's house, I think, to really feel safe and protected, and that you won't do something that you don't want to see yourself in a situation in these kind of cases. And it's something that we're learning. We're learning to hold both things, how to keep everyone safe, and on the other hand, still be flexible and not lose it. And in that, I think responsibility is an important thing, because sometimes, specifically women, I feel like they would say, there are times that they didn't put the boundary for themselves, and we, as the therapeutic place, we should help them put these boundaries, and we keep saying, no, we don't put boundaries, then we're not giving them the right service. Sometimes we have to take responsibility for them and say, no, I'm making this decision, and this is what's going to happen. And we see that they react also to that in a good way, when the boundary is set in the right way, in the right time, and from a respectful way, and they see that it's for their own good. Had good experience with that as well. So, how are we a therapeutic community? What does this mean? You can see here one of our meetings with the women's and the men's house that we do once in a while. First of all, why? Why a community? As I think it's obvious to everyone here, we understand that problems are created in a social context. They're expressed through our interactions with other people, through society, through family. So it would be natural to deal with them in social context. In that context, we can see these things, we can see really what comes up. It's not a list of symptoms. You see the person, you see that it's hard for them when someone is disappointed at them, that it's hard for them in the middle of the night when the person next to them is snoring. It's hard to make things together, to communicate as a group. We see these things, they come up, and we deal with them as a community. Deal with them not just with staff, all of the residents together. You really get to see the situations and to deal with them in a good way. I can say a little bit of things just when a resident comes. Of course, we always tell her, this is group therapy. You're welcome to join a group. It's not individual therapy for a few people that are together in a house. You will be part of other people's processes. They will be part of your process. We're doing this together. It's important that they understand this when they come in. We treat everyone as community members. That's how we call them. If there's a problem and you say you can't do this because it's bothering other community members. It's not because it's bothering the staff or someone else, just other community members. And that's everyone. That's also volunteers. That they come, we have volunteers for many different things. They're part of this community in a different way. I can say the relationships become really close and personal. We find, since there's a lot of conversations and deep conversations and personal conversations, the staff can share with residents from themselves. I've met many times share their experience, their feelings, what they think about the situation that's happening, how they were in similar situations, and these relationships sometimes they last even after they stay in Soteria, between residents and staff, or between the staff as well. People get really close to this job, you're there, you can't hide. And since it's a short-term community, we're constantly recreating. It's not like, okay, we got it together, this is what we're doing, these are the people, and now we keep going. People are constantly coming in and leaving, and then the question of who we want to be, how we want things to happen, it's like an ongoing thing. And I think that's part of the therapy, that you're invited to be part of a community, that you're welcome to change and take part and be creative and have initiative and decide. It could be on the norms of the community, it could be on how you want to design the house, it could be on anything. It's always open. It's yours. The residents come and it's yours. Like it's ours. It's not just for the residents, it's everyone. And that's also an important thing. The staff are people too. They're not here to serve as like an endless, I don't know, endless,
Punching bag.
that's not exactly what I was thinking of that too. They're endless giving and receiving. They're people and they have their limits. And also the responsibility. We don't have a cook, we don't have someone that's in charge of cleaning the house. These are tasks that the community has to take care of, and thinking how it will happen, who will do it, when, do we clean enough, do we not clean enough? These are issues that are talked on again and again and again. And I think it's important to say that we don't try to be their community, of course not for life because it's a short term, but even if when we do grow and we become we have like a program that would continue later, we don't want to replace the community. We don't want to be instead of a family or friends or other communities. We try to help them be able to use the community for support, whatever community it is, to reconnect to their family, to reconnect to friends, to be able to connect more to people and communicate better. I'll say, I think there's like three main things as a community. First of all, open communication. That's a basic thing. We talk a lot in Soteria, different people, different groups, together on your own. We talk a lot. It's a main tool that we use. And we have a daily house meeting every day at noon. Everyone that's in the house, staff, volunteers, residents, whoever there, someone maybe that came to visit, that's also a question to think about, comes together to the living room. We sit and there's just an open floor for whatever. Could be people sharing how they feel, something that was frustrating, something good, how was it when their family came to visit, that the toilets are really dirty and no one cleaned them, what do we want to make for dinner. Group dynamics about what's happening is a big issue that we're talking about, and it's happening, it's really working, and it's amazing to see what kind of things can happen in this meeting. You want to give the example?
Yeah. The house meetings are amazing because I didn't have personally that much experience with group therapy, and the last few years I've discovered the power of the group. And I remember one example, a woman late at night, one of the residents, said she's leaving. She's not going to stay anymore because the voices of the neighbors saying that they're going to come and rape her again and again as they did the previous nights. It's too dangerous, he cannot stay with us. And I know that it's late, it's dark, it's raining, and she has no place to go. Her family will not take her in, but I cannot convince her. There's nothing I can say. So I asked for permission to raise this with the group, and we do an improvised ad hoc group meeting, and with her permission, and I raised the problem because I'm feeling completely helpless here. And the other residents, one says, you know, that bedroom over there has a particularly strong lock. We can lock that door. And another resident says, I'm going to take my mattress, I'm going to put it on the floor, I'm going to sleep next to you tonight. And these ideas kept coming. And by the end of it, I don't know what exactly convinced her, but she stayed with us. There's no way I could have done it on my own. Using the power of the community, we were able to solve this problem and save her from I don't know what. So that's the sort of things we always have to know how to do.
And these things really do happen all the time. It's one example, we could say 100 great examples of things that happen in this group. We also have a house meeting of the whole community once a week, everyone comes. And that's also an opportunity to bring up things if there's something like someone wants to bring their dog over. We can't decide this only with who's here today. We have to have everyone in the community. We talk about it, and also can be reversed if later we think that we don't want the dog to be there, it's causing too much trouble. So there's also a community meeting, which I think is a really important thing. I'd say the most important thing for me in these meetings is the language and discourse that are created. We are building ourselves and building through the language. We understand each other better. We understand how we want to relate to each other. It's kind of like sort of modeling, because everyone brings their own model. It's not like we have a model, but everyone brings themselves in through the way we talk about ourselves. How we share, what we share, how we relate to other people, what we do with conflicts, different things. There's a language that's being created all the time. And residents say over and over that one of the most important things for them in Soteria was the language. The way that they are talking about themselves, the way that they feel comfortable to talk to other people, the way that they can listen to other people is a main thing that happens. Another thing that's important in our community is the way we relate to pain. In society, I don't have to tell you, when someone is suffering, it's hard to see them. You want to help them, you want to shut it out, you want them to get it together, you want this to end. You don't want this to keep continuing. And here, your pain is welcome. We don't encourage to suffer, of course, but what you feel is welcome. You can share it, you can talk about it, you can show your pain, you can cry. You're not expected to just feel good or be better or anything.
This is a very important point, the legitimacy of suffering, which has somehow been taken away from us in the Western world. And I'm sure it's not only my experience. Clients can call and say, can you help me? I have a chemical imbalance. No, that's not what you have. You're suffering, and there's this idea: if I'm suffering, give me the pill. And other than pharmacological means, in general, it's not legitimate. You get past it, don't suffer. It's not supposed to happen. In the house, we understand that that's also part of the human experience, and without going through the suffering, it's possible we may never get to the other side. So that's also something different in Soteria from what happens in most places.
Yeah, so we don't ask the residents to hide their pain. You're welcome to share it with the residents, to share it with the staff, to talk about what's going on. What you see here is a picture that one of the residents painted. This is her experience at Soteria. As you can see, she's very miserable in this picture. Everything is dark around, but there is some place that her pain can have a place for her pain. Inside all this pain. She doesn't have to make it go away, but there's a place that's loving and accepting and is offering a hand to help her. She was a really good example because she came and she had very serious dissociative seizures, and she would hurt herself. She would be in a situation, it would be really hard to see what was going on. It would be hard to be with her, but we were with her. We would sit with her for hours, hold her hand, help her not hurt herself, and see what she was going through. And time after time, she was shocked of our reaction. How can this be? No one has ever treated me in this way. People have always told me, you're making it up, you have to get it together, you have to get over it, pull yourself. And this is the first time that it was okay. It was okay to hurt. And it didn't change our relationship with her. She didn't feel unwanted after that. And it was time over time surprising for her because she had never had this experience. And also that has its complexities. First of all, there's like this built tension between the short term that we're offering and between the regression that this pain is inviting. On the one hand, we tell people you have to go through this pain, but this doesn't always happen in a few weeks. So we're in between these two things. On one hand, we don't want people to completely fall apart because we don't have the time for like a year and a half to go through all the pain and do serious psychotherapy for all this time to solve all the problems. And on the other hand, we don't want to tell them to suppress it, and we do want them to somehow get out of Soteria and go to the rest of the rehabilitation project here, so we'll be in a different place. So it's complicated to deal with this. Another thing is when pain is welcome, people are exposed to other people's pain and to their coping method with pain, which would be as painful on itself. And that's also something that we think about. How much do I want to share and what's going on with me? How much do we want to allow? This is an example of one of the residents. This is a picture that she painted before she came to Soteria. A lot of her pictures are like that, very beautiful and hopeful and when she was here, the talk about pain was very important, and the ability to feel the pain and be with the pain and have some space in her life, and her way of drawing changed. You can see this is the picture she drew while she was in Soteria. It's different than the other picture. This is another one. I don't know if you can see very well, but here's the feeling. Another kind of picture. And this actually we printed on mugs that we made for our first year anniversary, and everyone got the mug with her picture. I think one last thing, which is pretty obvious, is the partnership and companionship that happens when you're in a community. I can say I think that there's one main thing that people have a hard time showing compassion to themselves and accepting themselves and what's going on in their crisis situations, and sometimes to be there for someone else, to see someone else in their suffering, to to offer help, to offer compassion, to see them in a good light. It's something that can happen only when there's someone else on the other side. You can't do it for yourself, but when there's a partner or there's a friend, you want to be there for them, and your abilities for hope and for, yes, all kinds of powers that you have when you see someone else and you come out of you, and then you can use them for yourself. And it's beautiful to see how the connection creates all these beautiful things.
In a way, it's kind of an answer to not being alone in the city.
Yes.
Yes. And for being with, which we will speak about סיוון, I'll just, as an introduction, I'll say that in Jerusalem we have a particular version of it based on a well-known Hasidic story. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? I've heard it before. A story from Rabbi Nachman of Breslau 200 years ago, was a Hasidic mystical master who tells amazing stories. And this story is called the story of the Turkey Prince, where the prince, to the father's chagrin, you know the story.
I know it.
From
Soteria.
Does anybody not know it? Good, okay, I got a new crowd. The prince loses his mind, becomes psychotic. He believes he is a turkey, and he takes off all his clothes, goes under the table, starts licking crumbs from the floor. Nobody is able to help him out. None of the doctors have any solution. A wise man comes and tells the king, "Let me try." Fine, no one else succeeded. The wise man takes off all of his clothes, goes under the table together with the prince, and starts licking crumbs. And the prince says, "What are you doing here?" He says, "I'm a turkey. What are you doing here?" "I'm also a turkey." They develop a therapeutic relationship, and after a while the wise man says, "You know what? You could be a turkey and get some clothes on. I don't see any contradiction inherently in that." And they get dressed. And after a while he says, "These crumbs are a little bit flat today. Why don't we order some real food?" And they started eating real food. And then he said, "Oh, my back is hurting me. Let's sit at the table and eat this." And that way he manages to get him to the table. Very interesting story. A lot of questions. So by the end of that, was he cured? Was that the goal, to be cured? Or was it just a matter of being able to live with the contents of what he was feeling and to be able to still be in connection with society and not a stranger? So that is the emblematic story which we tell in Soteria, and sometimes we even talk about, hey, he has to be turkey. Yeah, he's already all turkeyed out. We did that, and this is sometimes the way we talk, and that's our spin on being with, which we'll hear a lot more about now.
Thank you. So I want to continue telling you about being with. It is from my point of view, which is different than my colleagues, since it is from the outside looking in. But maybe before that, I will tell you a little bit about why I did my research on the Soteria house and how that happened. So, on the third year of my BA, I was volunteering in a mental hospital in Israel. It is considered to be one of the most humane and professional and ethical hospitals. And in there, we've had, as volunteers, some interactions with patients. Some of them were more structured, but a lot of them were just non-formal, just sitting around, communicating, being with them. And those were the most meaningful moments for me. Out there was one patient who I created this special relationship with. We've had a lot of conversations together. Let's call him Joe. And he used to be a professional photographer. So every time we sat together, he brought his photo album and we sat and flipped through the pages. He explained to me about lighting and composition. And as we are sitting together, I can't help myself but thinking about the contrast between this beautiful, creative album and the cold, institutional world. Almost like the contrast between his personality as a talented photographer and his identity as a chronic schizophrenia patient. One day we're sitting together and he stops and he looks at me and he says, "סיוון, you know, sometimes a week can go by and you are the only person I'm talking to in a conversation that is not evolved around my medication or my diagnosis or my illness. From hospitalization to hospitalization, I have lost contact with all my friends, with my family. I'm practically alone. And as he's telling me those things, I can feel my heart turning sour. And so when I finished this year at the hospital, I began to wonder, are there any other models out there? And that was when I found out about the Soteria model and also about the open dialogue model. And so about 2 years later, I have founded, alongside my colleague Itai Kandel, he's not here today, we have founded Open Dialogue Israel. This is our logo in Hebrew. And actually, this is the first introductory workshop where a lot of Soteria members was a part of. And this is something that is very special to Soteria Israel as well, because there are family meetings for each and every resident. There are in the spirit of open dialogue. When it was time for me to decide what I'm going to write my thesis on, the Soteria House was already working, and it was clear to me that if I can contribute something or be a part of that, that is something I would very much appreciate. And so the best place to start telling you about being with, from my point of view, I believe it's from the first time I came to the house. And so I was getting into my car, I'm driving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and as the way passes, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable, my heart starts racing up, I can hear my heart beating, and my breath is getting shorter. I'm experiencing a panic attack. And as I'm trying to relax myself, when I was already arriving to Jerusalem, I'm realizing why. And the reason why is because I'm preparing myself. I'm preparing myself for the sounds and the smells and the energy of the closed ward. But the surprising thing for me was, the overwhelming thing for me was when I entered this living room at the men's house, is that it was nothing like those sounds, nothing like the smells, and nothing like the energy. And I was actually entering a scene of somewhat a goodbye party. Everyone was sitting in a circle, and this was a resident who had finished his treatment at the house. They were saying their goodbyes. And I'm joining in when Pesach's turn to talk arrived. I remember him saying that he is responsible for the hummus. Do you know hummus? For hummus making, he has very good hummus, and every time I visited the house later on, I tasted some of it.
It's also another lecture.
Yeah. Well, they were talking one by one to this resident, telling him things you can only tell to a person you know very well, intimate things about his abilities, about his character, about the gift he brings to the world, to other people. When it was his turn to talk, he was talking about his appreciation for the attentive and respectful and empowering treatment he got. And I was practically overwhelmed because the parallel situation I know from the hospital for a discharge committee is where a person needs to say he's ill, he needs to take his medication, and then he has to do that in enough persuasive way so they can tell he has insight. And the differences between these two experiences got me leaving the house, sitting in my car, and I can't stop. I can't stop driving. And so I'm sitting there, I cried for half an hour or so until I could start myself driving again, because I knew that this option, it exists. I saw it in my own eyes, but it is still the exception. Most of the people will not get their care there if they will need that. And it was very hard, but it was a very good fuel to start the research with, and a very good example of what it means, what it creates when you are with someone, when you are not talking about them, when you are with them together. And so I have interviewed 17 staff members from the men's house and for the women's house for 1 year. I have very long interviews, hearing about their experiences, hearing about their perceptions, and the main thing they were talking about is being with. And what I've heard is that being with is different in different situations. Well, being with someone who is now between dream and reality, that is the language they chose to describe it, what we so-called psychotic state, is different than being with someone who is now in a dangerous situation with or to others. It brings out different complexities when it is being with someone who has experienced past trauma. And I will elaborate on each and every one of those. So being with between dream and reality, as you have heard, one of the main values in the Soteria house is that you don't want to rule out someone's experience. You remember, pain is welcome. Whatever you experience is welcome. Well, if we don't rule out someone's experience, does that mean that we're not confrontational at all? Isn't there a place to say something like, you know, I don't hear what you hear, or I don't see what you see? One of the companions expressed it. She said, this is a question we are always struggling with. Is it our job to get into the story and be there with the resident? That's the slogan, being with. Or maybe our job is to mediate the conventional reality. And I think that the beauty of it is that there is no one right answer about it. Being within these situations requires this complex ability to dance around the border between the subjective reality of the resident and being with him all the way there, and sometimes when it is right, to bring the agreed upon reality. We're moving on to danger. Now this is something that is very special to Soteria because the only tool they have, as you've heard, is being with. To manage situations that are very charged sometimes, where there actually is a big danger. And at the men's house, it looks a bit different than the women's house. The staff at the men's house especially told me about dealing with dangerous situations where one poses dangers to other. In the women's house, it was a lot more about self-harm, suicidality. And when I asked one of the staff members at the women's house, she's a companion, what are you doing with self-harm? She was surprised that I'm thinking there is like a protocol or this one thing they're doing. She said, we are learning as we go. We notice that for her, it's best if someone holds her. For someone else, it is best if she is in the living room and everyone is with her. Each one according to her needs. And I want to invite Pesach maybe tell a story about the dangerous situations in the men's house.
I mean, from some of these nice stories, don't get the impression that's just a bunch of people sitting together and passing the time calmly. Sometimes, because we work with people who need, would otherwise be hospitalized in extreme states, sometimes we face extreme situations. 6 weeks ago, I remember I was called in at 5 a.m. Friday morning. This doesn't happen every Friday morning, thankfully. Someone who had come in the day before, quite psychotic, quite calm, didn't go to sleep that night, refused the medication he'd been getting for the 2 months before that. That means, you know, to go off medication one shot was not good. He began breaking things, and he smashed the window with his bare hands, and he would yell at the top of his lungs and frighten the whole home, and put out a cigarette on his arms. Familiar scenarios? The companions, very courageous companions, very dedicated, were concerned that we can't handle him, which happens sometimes. So I came in, and I saw that it was almost impossible to speak with him. I did get him to take some medication, but he continued to be quite frightening. And at some point, he went from behind. He believed he was Angel Gabriel. He could kill people. He has a right to do that. And at some point, he went behind one of the companions, and this resident has a background in martial arts, and held his head like this in a way that it suddenly seemed like he would try to just snap the spinal cord. Very frightening. The companion got away. At this point, I went through the way things are done in order to speak to whom I have to get him hospitalized. we're waiting for them to take him away, and he falls asleep from the medication I gave him. And I remember sitting there in the patio with the two companions who'd just been through a very difficult night, and suddenly one of them says, maybe he'll wake up a little bit calmer. And the other one thinks and says, yeah, it'd be kind of ashamed to have to hospitalize him if that happens. Shouldn't we give him another chance? Now, this is not something I would suggest because it's such a burden on them. They know that's what I'd like to hear, but I didn't say a word. But they said, I saw that they wanted to give it a try, so I gave very precise instructions. He slept for 6 or 8 hours. He woke up psychotic, strange, but much less violent. This was about 6 weeks ago, actually. I gave him medication more aggressively than I would in the hospital because we don't have other options, and better that we get it with us and not in the hospital. In a week he was much calmer. For a while, after 3 days he said, medication's okay, pump it up a little bit. I did. Like a week later I said, okay, I think that's enough. And I started reducing it. And he still had these psychotic thoughts, but they were much more under control. I was able to reduce the medication. I didn't want the side effects to continue. And he became much more focused, much more cooperative. Yesterday he finished his stay with us, a peaceable individual who stayed in touch with us to continue his care. It was a considerable risk, which the unbelievable companions who work with us were willing to take on. A lot of discussions after that, whether it was justified or not, was it the right thing to do, not a simple question. But we came through that, and that's some of the dangers which we occasionally, not often, but occasionally have to face.
You gave the medication voluntarily?
I'm sorry?
The medication you gave was voluntarily?
It can only be voluntary. Had he not wanted, he would not have gotten it. Legally, I can't give him if he refuses.
But there was the threat that if he doesn't take it, he might end up in...
Even if he does take it, he was going to end up at that point because of how violent he was. But there was a part of him which realized he needed the help, and there was no struggle over the medication. He struggled with it, and I mentioned the hospital, and he said, no, not that.
Okay, yeah.
So there was a not veiled threat. That's true. It wasn't. I would say it was. There also, I wanted to know where we were going, what we were doing. I shared with him our thought processes about what is happening next, and we need your cooperation. And if you don't, we have no choice. So that nothing was being done behind his back, even though it wasn't always clear that he would hear me, but he did hear me.
Thank you. We will move on to the next experience of being with, which is being with trauma. And this came almost exclusively from the women's house, and especially about sexual trauma. So the thing is, in a model that seeks to flatten the hierarchy, this situation of being with trauma arises some interesting questions about interpersonal boundaries and organizational boundaries. When I was talking to one of the companions, she told me about her experiencing some symptoms of secondary trauma. How do you say that? Vicarious. And the way she decided to handle with that through an interpersonal border. She said that, I realized my need in developing boundaries. It means that I can be present and empathic with whomever I am with, but not identify with her. It allows me to be with her all the way, but in the here and now, not in her experience back then. So the thing is, in order to be with, to be open, to be accepting, to be there with your heart open, you actually need boundaries. And until you get that, you can't be with someone, not for long, because you will fall apart. And that is a very important understanding about being with trauma at Soteria House. There are also examples of organizational boundaries they decided to put in. So, well, at the men's house, a part of that being a home is that people can come in and visit the family members, friends. They can come in and out. This is a part of the open feeling of the house. But at the women's house, this particular factor was not working. The women there felt very much unsafe. And so they had to be also flexible with the flexibility of the model. And they decided that at the women's house, there will be a limited visitation. And if someone comes in and visit, they should ask the residents beforehand and see that everyone is doing that.
That's also something that it happened in a house meeting. Some of the residents brought it up. They don't feel safe, but there's men walking around at 10 at night inside the house. And we talked about it. And the decision was that there's a limit to the time that men specifically in front of the house, or people would sit outside in the patio, not go inside the house. All these things are adjustments that are made dealing with what's happening.
So I think that by now, there is also another thing about being with the community. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Well, we talked a lot about being with an individual and whatever they're going through in different aspects. But as being a community, it has to be that you have to take into consideration the whole community. Sometimes it would be right that I could be with this person when they're moving around stuff or screaming or whatever, and I can deal with it, but the rest of the people can't deal with it. It's hard, it's causing anxiety, and you have to see everyone. You have to be with the whole. It includes the rest of the residents and it includes the staff. Also, if the staff don't feel safe in a certain situation, then we can't let this happen. It's something we're learning.
So what do you do in this situation?
First of all, we think about everyone when we talk and think about these things, and then we make decisions. Sometimes someone would be hospitalized if we, as a community, can't contain what's going on. It's happened. And a couple of days ago, we had a conversation with a resident that she was causing a lot of trouble in the house. She was very disrespectful to the residents, and we had a conversation. We had a house meeting about this. She said how she felt, other residents said how they felt, and we could get to some agreement. People could see her side, and it lasted for a few days, and later on the situation came out of hand, and we felt like we couldn't deal with it anymore. So we checked the pulse of the community at every certain time, and things that could be right now that would happen, and another time wouldn't be able to happen. It really depends on what's happening.
So it can happen also in the main house with violence or threat of violence, not violence. Violence, I understand now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it probably happens less there, but we also have to take into consideration what the whole community is feeling. It's not that somebody is scared, so we have to hospitalize. It's not that simple, obviously.
Yes, of course.
It's a process. We'll leave time at the end for questions. It's very important. We want to hear the feedback of the people, okay?
So, by now we all understand that being with is far more than an empty romantic slogan. It is an interpersonal expertise required in very complex situations. And from there, I believe that the questions rise up. So, if it is so, if it is an expertise, the question that follows is how do we become experts? Some of you are working at the Soteria house, and maybe some of you will open a house. And so, listening to the Soteria staff, we can today know how to turn the magic of being with into an applicable model. The Soteria staff told me about things that they're naturally doing. There were things that they're even not aware of, some knowledge that they use, this attitude they are carrying. And so I could recognize that they're using certain knowledge and certain attitude, and that they're working upon some moral compass. And this is the triangular model of being with, and I want to share that with you. The knowledge that they're using, well, it is different from the men's house and the women's house. It came up from what the staff was doing and what has worked for them, and me listening to that and connecting that to already existing theories, to already existing models. So at the men's house, it was the de-escalation model about how to prevent violence without using violence. they were actually doing that from their own experience, from their learning. At the Women's House, it was theories about trauma, whether it is trauma-informed service, the guidelines for this, or the psychotherapy for complex PTSD on the interpersonal level. When we're moving on talking about attitude, that starts to be more ambiguous. What does that mean? And when I talked to the staff working at Soteria, I could hear that they are asking themselves some questions about their beliefs, about them and others, about their existence, being connected to others. And so this component sends us as practitioners to check with ourselves, what do we believe in, and how does that come through in the therapeutic encounter? Are we using dialogue or monologue to communicate? Are we treating others as objects or subjects, etc.? But it starts with our own belief. The moral compass. So we have the knowledge and we have the attitude, but you have heard again and again and again in this lecture that none of that is important until you notice the particular needs of this present moment with this particular resident. And so the thing that gets the moral part of it is that the ethics of the present moment. You gotta ask yourself some 3 guiding questions, and this is something that they are doing at the Soteria house fluently and unknowingly. But for us, it's 1, am I fully present with the other person so I can acknowledge the particular needs of this situation? 2, am I open to the possibility that this situation should be managed in an entirely different way than what I did yesterday with the same person or with another person in a similar state, being open to change? And 3rd, am I willing to learn from this experience and give the knowledge that came out of it the same or even bigger weight than the theoretical knowledge I hold? I remember especially about that one, I was in the Soteria house, in the women's house. They had a staff meeting, and something very troubling happened with some of the residents, and they started talking about why was she acting like that, what we didn't give her, so she had to act like that. And they were starting to talk about her history, etc. And someone asked, wait a minute, what is her diagnosis? What is her diagnosis? And I remember myself telling her, why is that important? How does that helps us? How does that theoretical part helps us to be there with her in a better way? And that was profoundly important for me to hear and special for me to hear. So there is that. You want to say something?
Everybody, we don't have any choice. People get diagnoses there, but it's not a part of the internal dialogue of the home. It's not the way we try to understand what needs to be done. Diagnoses ultimately are these conventional labels which we place on people and really don't help us help these people in distress.
So you should answer yes to all of these questions, and you know you're on the right path towards being with. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna skip a story because I want to sort of summarize and explain what the vision, where we're heading over here. The other stories I don't have time to tell are of these amazing successes against all odds. You know how it goes, so I can just skip it. Okay, to give you just a few numbers, for 2018 in the 2 homes, the men's home and the women's home in Jerusalem, there were 104 admissions, so to speak, of 94 people. In other words, some of them were returning, all ages, but most of them tend to be in their 20s or 30s. Some people have never been hospitalized, some people have been hospitalized many times. 70% approximately with psychotic states. A little more than that in the men's home. In the women's home, a more tendency to complex PTSD. I'm not going to get into the whole discussion if that should also be considered psychotic or not. It doesn't interest me. The average stay is 37 days. It has a range from a couple of days to half a year. I would love it if, like Lauren Marshall could keep people there for half a year. I think we do amazing work. Rarely we've been able to do that, but the more we become part of the system, the less that's going to be happening. About 10% of people become so violent and uncooperative. Usually these are people with manic energies that we can't handle them, though we're getting better at that. I admit that when we first set up Soteria, I think that I had this fantasy with all the love and support that we'll be giving. Who needs medication? It hasn't quite worked out that way. And on the contrary, especially with manic people, we're more aggressive, but occasionally people still have to be hospitalized. Now, I'm very excited about what we've done, that we have these two houses operating, and we have no intention of remaining a marginal curiosity in the world of psychiatry. I'm a professor of psychiatry, the former head of psychiatry in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I have maintained my connections to the establishment. This, I think, is very important because I don't want one or two homes. I want a lot more than that. So our third home, as I said, will be set up in 2 weeks and 2 days. And in 2 weeks from last night, we're going to have this wonderful party to celebrate. You're all invited, incidentally.
What did you take you up on?
That would be wonderful. You are not threatening me. At the end, I'll have an email. Just let me know. We want to be developing. We got a grant to develop follow-up services, and people can remain a part of the community even when they're no longer staying with us around the clock. That's very important. We're aiming for full public funding. It's terrible that we've had to take out-of-pocket payments in order to survive. First, we didn't even ask for that. We just have done philanthropy, proof of concept. But as the demand has grown, we take money, a lot of money, but it's less than hospitalization. And in Israel, there are 4 medical insurers which cover 100% of the citizens. We signed with one of them, so their people do not pay a penny, just like in hospitalization. We're close to signing with the second, and I'm confident that they'll all come on board. And as I said, we'll soon have 3 homes. There will be there are 4 others, also alternative hospitals in the community, and the more houses we set up, the more we want to set up. I believe that 2,600 acute care inpatient psychiatric hospitals in the country, based on my long experience running a closed board, we can handle about half of them. Do the math, 1,300 beds, 10 beds per home. That means that I anticipate 130 beds, but it's not just a mathematical thing. We're close to the tipping point where people who need to be cared for 24/7 around the clock, they'll say for them or for their loved one, I don't want to go into the institution. Where's the nearest stabilizing home? Where's the nearest Soteria? That's where I want to go. And what we're doing here won't be complete until that in the public consciousness will be an awareness. This is where I go if I need help. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll go to the hospital. But the first line has to be a home like this. And we're making strides. This is a political issue, and we're in touch struggle, but society is with us. I mean, sometimes some of my colleagues, I have to expend a little more effort to get them on board, but it's happening, and it's changing. As I said in the beginning, the paradigm of psychiatry. We go back to treating people. This is the low-tech wave of the future. I do hope this will be an example not only for Israel but for other places around the world. And to an extent, I was surprised how many people are connected to Soteria here. It's just like I'm preaching to the choir. I want other people to also learn about what we're doing here, and really it's important to get the word out that this is possible. Soteria has kind of a left wing and a right wing. There's a left wing which is completely anti-medication, anti-professional staff. That is not something which is viable in the way things work today. I don't think it's what needs to be done. The right wing, places like in Bern, Luke Champion set her up, a wonderful guy, was offended when I said it's right wing, but there you have diagnoses and medication and professional staff mainly or only, or somewhere in between. And it's very important because we do see ourselves ultimately not as some kind of revolutionary cell waiting for the end of days when everyone will see the light. We want it to happen now. Soteria, you all know what it means. You do know what it means. Yes. And we want to make this change happen, and we can feel the progress which is being made in this nationwide experiment happening in Israel, which I feel very optimistic, looking at how far we've gone in the 3 years compared to the 12 previous years of futile energies, and where we're going to be in 3 years from now. I'm really curious because I'm very optimistic. Okay, now that's the end of our presentation. Yes, and thank you to my son for giving up on me for this week. Yes, take down take a picture of my son there. No, you take the email. Okay.
The presentation will be uploaded.
The presentation will be uploaded on the Isps site, and we have time now for questions. Right, we have about 10 minutes without being late to respond to any questions, please. Go ahead. From the Czech Republic, yes.
Many questions were your presentations. Mainly I've been thinking about the accessibility for people aggregated in Soteria. And also I was thinking about, you mentioned the homes are divided, like gender divided, which are understand also the experience you heard.
Divided?
The gender divided.
Gender divided, yes.
So I would be curious to hear a bit more about the reason for that. And I was wondering about LGBT people and other kinds of identities and so on. How it would be dealt in such a setting.
Sure. As you'll take the second question about gender separation and all. People come to us in the beginning. They didn't. It took time till they heard about us. More and more of the psychiatrists refer to us. Sometimes from the psychiatric emergency rooms they refer to us. Sometimes friends brings a friend, or they hear about us. There have been articles about us and television spots. People are much more aware of the service, so they come. And now when we signed with one of the insurance companies, so they sometimes send a referral. We have someone we want to send to you and not to the hospital. So that's becoming less and less of a problem. Anyone who comes in, a psychiatrist, this is mandated by the Ministry of Health, has to do that first interview to see that it's okay that person will come in. As far as the last question about LGBT, we've of course we've had many homosexual people who have been with us. We've had one transsexual converting male to female early in the process, from a Hasidic Jew to a Jewish man studying to a secular woman, and he wasn't sure whether he or she and how we should talk to her, and we showed her a role that both homes were sort of post-gender, more clear than but we don't diagnose, right? And in the end, it was very interesting that even though I thought she should be in the women's home, the women didn't want her because they were afraid of her. They said so many of them have suffered at the hands of men and sexual trauma. They didn't trust this.
I wouldn't say it's exactly what happened. Well, we talked, no, not exactly. We talked about
No
it.
hierarchy, it's miserable.
We talked about it before she came to the women's house just to visit, and we asked, like, what are the fears, what are the things that they're concerned about, mainly which room she will be in, because we don't have private rooms. And the women asked for her to come to a conversation and to be able to talk openly. To say what we're worried about and to know exactly how things would be. And when she came to the house, she was a little scared.
She was, yeah. So she decided, basically, she stayed in the men's home, where she was very well received. It was an unusual situation. You want to talk about the gender separation?
Yeah, I can say it's something that a lot of people are concerned about, I think. They ask, like, only women, only men. Some people would want to be in a separated house. I know from the women's house, some people are really happy that it's separated. I personally understand that. I think that when we're dealing with, sometimes it's better that there are only women residents in this house. We do have men staff. And I think some people want to.
Not many.
Yeah, a few. And they're picked very specifically. I think that the fact that the new house, the third house, would be combined is going to give an option that you can be either here or there. You don't have to choose between. Good question. Is there really issues between you and a lot?
Our third home will be mixed, will be male and female. Any another question?
Well, my question was about the referrals. Also, it's answered. But I just want to say that it's great to meet you. It's like-minded people. And I'm really enthusiastic because I read your article on psychosis.
That's
and I really
embarrassing.
enjoyed reading it. And such a long way to come, and then now to hear that you're opening up new houses and such a bright future, that's great.
Well, thank you. It's a very personal article. You weren't supposed to read it. So.
Yeah, I'm curious. I know there's no standard next step, but in thinking about when you have this continuing services after people leave Soteria, what are the living situation options for people in the context of where you guys are operating? Is there a lot available, or?
Maybe I'll answer. I think we're dealing with this question a lot because it's very hard to leave Soteria. It's so warm and cozy.
Yeah.
And when you go out, it's always going to be a big difference. In Israel, there are rehabilitation services that can be living and what we call a hostel. But it's just with a few more people in the house. There could be a therapeutic, it's called these communities that are, I don't know the word, but like a community that it's less secure. Like everyone has their own house, but there's a central house, different things like that. And you could also get services that a social worker would come to your house and accompany you, and there's many just social programs and different things that would happen. There are options, but the thing is, in order to get all these, you have to be granted, I guess, by the country that you are disabled and you need to have these things. And this process can take a few months. So the chance that someone, until they realize that they want to get the service, and by the time they would finish the process, they wouldn't be in Soteria. So sometimes there's a gap in between. And sometimes we try to think of different options, like to be in for a certain time with your family, or maybe one of our residents didn't talk to her family for years, and through meetings that were in the open dialogue style, she reconnected with her mother and she moved in with her. So that's something from day one when the resident comes, we try to think what would be when you leave the house. And we keep thinking about it, but it is complicated, and everyone has their options and doesn't have other options.
Okay.
I belong to a sister or brother, I'm not sure, organization called Isps. And I've been a member of that for a long time, and we were well aware of the work of Lauren Murphy's surprising endeavor with respect to the original Soteria house and how it unfortunately got shut down by powers that be. We hope that does not happen to you guys. However, we were part of trying to reconstitute something of that nature, and all of us put our heads together, and now we have created, maybe 5-6 years ago, a Soteria in Alaska. And so far, so good. They've had their growing pains and they've had their problems.
It continues to function.
But it is functioning.
And where did it close down?
Well, I don't know lately. It's one of the residents, and that became a cause celebrate.
Yeah.
Just enough for people to want to pull the plug, but a big problem. It went back and forth. But all this is just a preview, a lead-up to what I'd like to propose. If in some way I can be of service to you, I'd like to do that. And in the capacity that I currently have, I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of a psychoanalytic research journal. And I'd love to give you guys some printing space. I think I've mentioned this to you earlier here, with respect to Soteria. And so any empirical findings that you have that would establish your name more in the United States, I'd love to be able to publish.
Thank you.
So
You'll give me a
I'll
card.
give you my card later and you can contact me.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good. There were, yes.
I was curious about whether you can accept candidates from other countries, the U.S. for example, or whether they have to be
English
citizens.
speaking?
We have, most people speak English in the country and in Soteria. Occasionally, we have someone from Australia who speaks very little Hebrew. It's a possibility, it can be arranged, yes.
It's happened a few times.
Yes.
It's actually interesting, like, the feeling that you're not understood. This is something that's brought up a lot. Someone is speaking English and they don't understand Hebrew and they feel not understood. It's actually an opportunity to talk about what is it like to be a stranger.
It's possible.
Yeah, it's just one of the little technical questions. When you have something like the gentleman who was upset in the middle of the night when you said you wanted the peers, you literally knock on doors and say, hey, everybody, we need everybody in the meeting room? Or how do you make the spontaneity of the moment?
That's not our style.
I was just curious, I didn't know.
Right. We let whoever's there know, and if we see, they know that someone's available, they pull them in as well, but certainly in the middle of the night, we wouldn't knock on doors. We would encourage people to come to the daily house meetings, certain events like we do that. Knocking on the doors. So in general, we have activities throughout the day. None of them do we demand that people show up to them. And personally, I think that the main thing is not the activities which we offer, psychodrama, yoga, house meetings, but it's often just the time in between when a person can be with himself or herself, or in the middle of the night, not able to sleep, goes and has an amazing conversation with one of the companions. That's when the things really happen, I think.
But that's the thing, it sounded like it's in the moment, but I wasn't sure how you make it in the moment.
Well, usually when something is going on with someone, something serious, everyone is aware of it. And they're kind of in the house looking for someone to relate to, and the companions really have to take them in consideration as well. When there's a crisis here, the whole house is in a crisis, and we have to take into consideration everyone. So combining everyone together is really being with the community in this sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of an idea about being there, and when things are happening, we kind of contribute to the process. It's not a requirement, but we're all kind of aware that we want to help each other, and so there's kind of an organic happening.
It's part of the language.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. You're all invited to spread the word, and at 3:30 we're going to hear about you guys, right?